morning in the name of Jesus. Father, Lord, we just thank you. We appreciate you, Lord, in Jesus' name. I'll be reading from Esther chapter 1, and I'm reading the New King James Version. Now it came to pass in the days of Ahasuerus. This was the Ahasuerus who reigned over 127 provinces from India to Ethiopia. In those days, when King Ahasuerus sat on the throne of his kingdom, which was in Shushan, the citadel, that in the third year of his reign, he made a feast for all his officials and servants, the powers of Persia and Media, the nobles and the princes of the province, being before him, when he showed the riches of his glorious kingdom and the splendor of his excellent majesty for many days, 180 days in all. Verse 5. And when these days were completed, the king made a feast lasting 7 days for all the people who were present in Shushan, the citadel, from great to small, in the court of the garden of the king's palace. There were white and blue linen curtain fastened with cords of fine linen and purple on silver rods and marble pillars, and the couches were gold and silver on a mosaic pavement of alabaster, turquoise, white, and black marble. And they served drinks in gold vessels, each vessels being different from each other, with royal wine in abundance, according to the generosity of the king. In accordance with the law, the drinking was not compulsory, for so the king had ordered all the officers of his household that they should do according to each man's pleasure. Verse 9. Queen Vashti also made a feast for the women in the royal palace which belonged to King Ahasuerus. On the seventh day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, he commanded Mehuman, Bitsa, Abona, Bigta, Abagta, Zeta, Kakarkas, 7 eunuchs who served in the presence of King Ahasuerus, to bring Queen Vashti before the king, wearing a royal crown, in order to show her beauty to the people and the officials, for she was beautiful to behold. But Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command, and brought by his eunuch. Therefore, the king was furious, and his anger burned within him. Then the king said to the wise men who understood the times, for this was the king's manner towards all who knew law and justice, those closest to the king being Kashmina, Adamatashi, Meres, Masina, and Memucan, the 7 princes of Media, who had access to the king's presence, who ranked highest in the kingdom. Verse 15. What shall we do to Queen Vashti according to the law, because she did not obey the command of the king Ahasuerus brought to her by the eunuch? And Memucan answered before the king and the princes, Queen Vashti has not only wronged the king, but also all the princes and all the people who are in the province of King Ahasuerus. Verse 17. For the queen's behavior will become known to all women, so that they will despise their husband in their eyes. When they report, King Ahasuerus commanded Queen Vashti to be brought in before him, but she did not come. This very day, the noble ladies of Persian Media will say to all the king's officials that they've heard of the behavior of the king. Thus, there will be excessive contempt and wrath. Verse 19. If it pleases the king, let a royal decree go out from him. Let it be ordered in the laws of Persian Medes, so that it will not be altered, that Vashti shall come no more before King Ahasuerus, and let the king give our royal position to another who is better than she. Verse 20. When the king's decree, which will make it proclaimed throughout all the empire, for it is great, all wives will honor their husbands, both great and small. Verse 21. And the reply pleased the king and the princes, and the king did according to the word of Memucan. Verse 22. Then he sent letter to all the king's provinces, to each province in its own script, and to every people in their own language, that each man should be master of his own house and speak in the language to his own people. Chapter 2. After these things, when the wrath of King Ahasuerus subsided, he remembered Vashti, what she had done, and what had been decreed against her. Then the king's servants who attended him said, "Let beautiful young virgin be sought for the king, and let the king appoint officers in all the provinces of his kingdom, that they may gather all the young, beautiful young virgin to Shushan the citadel into the women's quarter under the custody of Agai, the king's eunuch and custodian of women, and let beauty preparation be given to them." Verse 4. Then let the young woman who pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti. This thing pleased the king, and he did so. Verse 5. In Shushan, the citadel, there was a certain Jew whose name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, a Benjamite. Kish had been carried away from Jerusalem, and the captives who had been captured with Jeconiah, king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had carried away. Verse 7. And Mordecai had brought up Hadassah, that is Esther, his uncle's daughter, for she had neither father nor mother. The young woman was lovely and beautiful. When her father and mother died, Mordecai took her as his own daughter. Verse 8. So it was when the king's command and decree were heard, and when many young women were gathered at Shushan, the citadel, under the custody of Agai, that Esther also was taken to the king's palace, into the care of Agai, the custodian of women. Now the woman pleased him, and she obtained his favor. So he readily gave beauty preparation to her besides her allowance. Then 7 choice maidservants were provided for her from the king's palace, and he moved her and her maidservant to the best place in the house of the woman. Verse 10. Esther had not revealed her people or family, for Mordecai had charged her not to reveal it. Verse 11. And every day Mordecai paced in front of the court of the women's quarter to learn of Esther's welfare and what was happening to her. Verse 12. Each young woman's turn came to go in to King Ahasuerus after she had completed 12 months preparation, according to the regulation for the women. For those were the days of their preparation apportioned, 6 months with oil of myrrh, and 6 months with perfume and preparation for beautifying women. Verse 13. Thus prepared each woman went to the king, and she was given whatever she desired to take with her from women's quarters to the king's palace. Verse 14. In the evening she went, and in the morning she returned to the second house of the women, to the custody of Shagai, the king's eunuch who kept the concubine. She would not go into the king again unless the king delighted in her and called for her by name. Verse 15. Now when the turn came for Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her as his daughter to go into the king, she requested nothing but what Agai, the king's eunuch, the custodian of the women, advised. And Esther obtained favor in the sight of all who saw her. Verse 16. So Esther was taken to the king Ahasuerus into his royal palace in the 10th month, which is the month of Tebet, in the 7th year of his reign. Verse 17. The king loved Esther more than all the women, and she obtained grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins. So he set the royal crown upon her head, made her queen instead of Vashti. Verse 18. Then the king made a great feast, the feast of Esther, for all his officials and servants, and he proclaimed the holiday in the provinces and gave gifts according to the generosity of the king. Verse 19. When virgins were gathered together for a second time, Mordecai sat within the king's gate. Now Esther had not revealed her family and her people, just as Mordecai had charged her. For Esther obeyed the command of Mordecai as when she was brought up by him. Verse 21. In those days, while Mordecai sat within the king's gate, two of the king's eunuchs, Bigtam and Teresh, doorkeepers, became furious and sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. So the matter became known to Mordecai, who told Queen Esther, and Esther informed the king in Mordecai's name. Verse 23. When an inquiry was made into the matter, it was confirmed, and both were hanged on a gallows, and it was written in the book of the Chronicles in the presence of the king. Chapter 3. After these things, King Ahasuerus promoted Aman, the son of Amedata the Agagite, and advanced him and set a seat above all the princes who were with him. Verse 2. And all the king's servants who were within the king's gate bowed and paid homage to Aman, for so the king had commanded concerning him. But Mordecai would not bow or pay homage. Verse 3. The king's servants who were within the king's gate said to Mordecai, why do you transgress the king's command? Now it happened when they spoke to him daily and he would not listen, that they told it to Haman to see whether Mordecai's word would stand. For Mordecai had told them that he was Jew. Verse 5. When Haman saw that Mordecai did not bow or pay homage to him, Haman was filled with wrath. Verse 6. But he disdained to lay hands on Mordecai alone, for they had told him of the people of Mordecai. Instead, Haman sought to destroy all Jews who were throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus, the people of Mordecai. Verse 7. In the first month, which is the month of Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, they cast Pur, that is the lot, before Haman to determine the day and the month until it fell on the 12th month, which is the month of Adar. Verse 8. Then Haman said to King Ahasuerus, there is a certain people scattered and dispersed among the people in all the province of your kingdom. Their laws are different from all other people. They do not keep the king's law. Therefore, it's not fitting for the king to let them remain. Verse 9. If it pleases the king, let a decree be written that they be destroyed, and I will pay 10,000 talents of silver into the hands of those who do the work to bring it into the king's treasury. Verse 10. So the king took a signet from his hand and gave it to Haman, the son of Amedata the Agagite, the enemy of the Jews. Verse 11. And the king said to Haman, the money and the people are given to you to do with them as seems good to you. Verse 12. Then the king's scribe were called on the 13th day of the first month, and a decree was written according to all Haman commanded, to the king's satraps, to the governors who were over each province, to the officials of all the people, to every province according to its script, to every governor who were over each province according to the script, to every people in their language. In the name of King Ahasuerus it was written and sealed with the king's signet. And the letters were sent by courier into all king's provinces to destroy, to kill, and to annihilate all Jewish. Sorry, somebody is, I need to mute. Thank you. Sorry about that. To annihilate all Jews, both young and old, little children and women, in one day, on the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, and to plunder their possession. Verse 14. A copy of the document was to be issued as law in every province, being published to all people, that they should be ready for that day. Verse 15. The courier went out, hastened by the king's command, and the decree was proclaimed in Shushan, the citadel. So the king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city of Shushan was perplexed. Chapter 4. When Mordecai learned all that happened, he tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and ashes and went out into the midst of the city. He cried out with a loud and bitter cry. He went as far as the front of the king's gate, for no one might enter into the king's gated cloth with sackcloth. and in every province where the king's command and decree arrived, there was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting, weeping, and wailing, and many lay in sackcloth and ashes. Verse 4. So Esther's maid Anina came and told her, and the queen was deeply distressed. Then she sent garments to clothe Mordecai, take his sackcloth away from him, but he will not accept them. Then Esther called attached to one of the king's in-law who he had appointed to attend to her, and gave him a command concerning Mordecai to learn what and why this was. So Attach went out to Mordecai in the city square that was in front of the king's gate. And Mordecai told him all that happened, and the sum of money that Haman had promised to pay into the king's treasury to destroy the Jews. Verse 8. He also gave him a copy of the written decree for their destruction, which was given at Shushan, that he might show it to Esther and explain it to her, that he might command her to go into the king to make supplication to him and plead before him for our people. Verse 9. Attach returned and told Esther the words of Mordecai. Then Esther spoke to Attach and gave him a command for Mordecai. Verse 11. All the king's servants and the people of the king's province know that any man or woman who goes into the inner court to the king who has not been called, he has but one law: put all to death except the one whom the kings hold out the golden scepter that he may live. Yet I myself have not been called into the king these 30 days. Verse 12. So they told Mordecai Esther's word. Verse 13. And Mordecai told them to answer Esther, do not think in your heart that you will escape in the king's palace any more than all the other Jews. For if you remain completely silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arrive for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. Yet know whether you have come to the king for such a time as this. Verse 15. Then Esther told them to reply Mordecai, go gather all the Jews who are present in Shushan and fast for me. Neither eat nor drink for 3 days, night or day. My maid and I will fast likewise. And so I will go to the king, which is against the law. And if I perish, I perish. Verse 17. So Mordecai went his ways and did according to all that Esther had commanded him. Chapter 5. Now it happened on the third day that Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the king's palace, across from the king's house, while the king sat on his royal throne in the royal house, facing the entrance of the house. Verse 2. So it was, when the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court, that she found favor in his sight, and the king held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. Then Esther went near and touched the top of the scepter. Verse 3. The king said to her, what do you wish, Queen Esther? What is your request? And it shall be given to you, up to half the kingdom. Verse 4. So Esther answered, if it pleases the king, let the king and Haman come today to the banquet that I have prepared for him. Verse 5. Then the king said, bring Haman quickly, that he may do as Esther has said. So the king and Haman went to banquet that Esther had prepared. Verse 6. At the banquet of wine, the king said to Esther, what is your petition? And it shall be granted. What is your request? Up to half of the kingdom, and it shall be done. Verse 7. Then Esther answered and said, my petition and request is this. Verse 8. If I found favor in the sight of the king, if it pleases the king to grant my petition and fulfill my request, then let the king and Haman come to the banquet which I'll prepare for them, and tomorrow I'll do as the king has said. Verse 9. So Haman went out that day, joyful with a glad heart. But when Haman saw Mordecai at the king's gate, that he did not stand or tremble before him, he was filled with indignation against Mordecai. Nevertheless, Haman restrained himself and went home. And he sent and called for his friends and his wife Zeresh. Verse 11. Then Haman told them of his great riches, the multitude of his children, everything which the king had permitted him, how he had advanced him above the officials and servants of the king. Verse 12. Moreover, Haman said, beside Queen Esther invited no one but me to come in with the king to the banquet that she prepared, and tomorrow I am again invited by her along with the king. Yet all this avails me nothing, so long as I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate. Verse 14. Then his wife Zeresh and all his friends said to him, let a gallows be made, 50 cubits high, and in the morning suggest to the king that Mordecai be hanged on it. Then go merrily with the king to the banquet. And this thing pleased Haman, so he had the gallows made. Chapter 6. That night the king could not sleep. So one was commanded to bring the book of the records of the chronicles, and they were read before the king. And it was found written that Mordecai had told of Bigtha and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs, the doorkeeper who had sought to lay hand on King Ahasuerus. Verse 3. Then the king said, what honor or dignity has been bestowed on Mordecai for this? And the king's servant who attended him said, nothing has been done for him. So the king said, who is in the court? Now Haman had just entered the court of the king's palace to suggest that the king hang Mordecai on the gallows that he had prepared for him. Verse 5. The king's servant said to him, Haman is here standing in the court. And the king said, let him come in. So Haman came in, and the king asked him, what shall be done for the man who the king delights to honor? Now Haman thought in his heart, whom would the king delight to honor more than me? Verse 7. And Haman answered the king, for the man whom the king delights to honor. Verse 8. Let a royal robe be brought which the king had worn, and the horse on which the king has ridden, which has a royal crest placed on it. Then let this robe and horse be delivered to the hand of the one king's noble prince, that he may arraign the man whom the king delights to honor, then parade him on horseback through the city square and proclaim before him, thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor. Verse 10. Then the king said to Haman, hurry, take the robe, the horse, as you have suggested, and do so for Mordecai the Jew, who sits within the king's gate. Leave nothing undone of all until you have spoken. Sorry, I just have to laugh. Verse 11. So Haman took the robe and the horse, arrayed Mordecai, and led him on a horseback through the city, and proclaimed before him, thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor. Verse 12. After Mordecai went back to the king's gate, but Haman hurried to his house mourning, with his head covered. Verse 13. When Haman told his wife Zeresh and all his friends everything that happened to him. His wise men and his wife Zeresh said to him, if Mordecai before whom you have begun to fall is of Jewish descent, you will not prevail against him, but you will surely fall before him. Verse 14. While they were still talking with him, the king's eunuch came and hastened to bring Haman to the banquet which Esther had prepared. Verse 7, chapter 7. So the king and Haman went to dine with Queen Esther, and on the second day at the banquet of the wine, the king said to Esther, what is your petition? Queen Esther, it shall be granted to you. And what is your request? Up to half of the kingdom, it shall be done. Verse 3. The Queen Esther answered and said, if I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it pleases the king, let my life be given me at my petition, and my people at my request. For we have been sold, my people and I, to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be annihilated. Had we been sold as male and female slaves, I would have held my tongue, although the enemy could never compensate for the king's loss. So King Ahasuerus answered and said to Queen, who is he Where is he? Who would dare presume in his heart to do such a thing? And Esther said, the adversary and the enemy is the wicked Haman. So Haman was terrified before the king and the queen. Then the king arose in his wrath from the banquet of wine and went into the palace garden. But Haman stood before Queen Esther, pleading for his life, for he saw that evil was determined against him by the king. When the king returned from the palace garden to the place of the banquet of wine, Haman had fallen across the couch where Esther was, and the king said, will he also assault the queen while I'm in the house? As this word left the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. Verse 9. Now Harbona, one of the king's eunuchs, said to the king, look, the gallows, 50 cubit high, which Haman made for Mordecai, who spoke good on the king's behalf, is standing at the house of Haman. So the king said, hang him on it. So they hanged Haman on the gallows which he had prepared for Mordecai. Then the king's wrath was subsided. God bless the reading of his word. Oh my goodness. God bless the reading of his word. That was really wonderful. It's been wonderful reading the word of the Lord with you this morning. Just a friendly reminder, prayer continues tomorrow at the same time. And also a reminder of our Sunday worship coming up at 12 noon Eastern Time and 12 noon Central Time. God bless you. We look forward to feasting on the word together with you. God bless and have a very wonderful day.